Hi, welcome to Chapter 5, Cognitive Development in Infancy. Basically, we're going to take a look at what are the cognitive changes in an infant, learning, categorizing, remembering, the beginning of language, and measuring. How do we measure intelligence in infancy? These are the more specific learning objectives that we're going to cover in this very brief, long PowerPoint. First of all, a quick review of PSY. Covers basically three concepts. Assimilation, which is a process of fusing incoming information to existing schemes to make sense of experiences. Accommodation is where the child is changing the scheme to incorporate new information. And sensor motor intelligence is a refinement of innate schemes by experiences of the senses and motor actions. One of the assignments I gave last week and I wanted to continue to do is go to My Virtual Life and create a child, name it and everything, and continue the My Virtual Life of your child up until 18 months. Be sure to watch the videos of development. They're really handy. First of all, Piaget said a child, initially all the learning comes through physical, basically physical actions. That's what's called the sensor motor stage, learning by sensing. The child, of course, has their basic reflexes, which is innate, but also they start learning what's called primary circular reaction, which are simple repetitive actions organized around the infant's whole body, being able to move around, to turn and stuff like that. And then there's what's called secondary circular reaction, which is the baby repeatedly exhibits behavior to produce a desired outcome. So maybe being able to turn over, to move itself, scoot itself about. Then there's a coordination of secondary schemes, which is a means to an end behavior. And that's purposeful behavior to achieve a goal. And then next is tertiary circular reaction. This is where the infant begins to experiment with different behaviors to come up with different outcomes. And then there's more transition to symbolic thought, understanding words. And so these are the steps we're going to cover in the sensomotor stage. There's a nice little video here. Now, for these videos to work, you have to open up the PowerPoint, and not the URL, the narrated PowerPoint, but the regular PowerPoint, and you'll be able to play these videos if you have access to my Psych Lab. So it's kind of a little perk of buying the textbook and having access to my Psych Lab. Let's look at Piaget's sensor motor stage by age. The first 0 to 1 month, from birth to 1 month, the focus is on reflexes. The sucking reflex, looking reflex, those are important in the initial child's development. These are the first schemes or inborn reflexes. Rooting, sucking, grasping reflexes. Next, from 1 to 4 months, the baby develops what's called primary circular reactions, which the infant discovers actions involving their own bodies. And this happens by accident. They learn by trial and error to repeat them until they become habits or schemes. For example, at first, the thumb comes to the mouth by accident. Through trial and error, infants learn to reproduce that event until a thumb-sucking scheme becomes established. So it starts by accident and turns into a pattern. Secondary circular reaction is where the infants discover actions involving objects in their environment by accident and then learn it by trial and error and repeat them and become habits. For example, while holding the rattle, the infant may accidentally shake the rattle and enjoy the noise. But through trial and error, the infant learns to reproduce the event until the shaking scheme becomes established. So that would be secondary circular reaction. For those of you young moms out here, you're going to enjoy trying a lot of these different activities on your infant. Be careful not to, say, "Oh, my child's behind in this area," because although Piaget has real clear stages, babies, there's a huge variety in development in babies. So don't freak out if your infant's not showing these different behaviors right at these stages, because there's a range. They vary from child to child. Eventually, all children will acquire these skills over time. Next is substage 4. That's from 8 to 12 months. And this is where the child coordinates secondary schemes. This is where the infants intentionally put two schemes together to solve a problem or a goal. Intentionally, it's a new feature. These new behaviors are no longer discovered by accident. For example, if an infant sees a toy behind a box, pushes the box aside, reaches for the toy. So the infant is intentionally combining pushing and reaching schemes to reach their goal. Okay. Next is what's called tertiary circular reactions. And this is where babies are curious about objects in the world and explore them in a trial and error fashion. They're trying to produce novel reactions. For example, if a baby drops a ball from the shoulder height and watches what happens, the baby then explores the dropping scheme by dropping the ball from the hip height, from the head height, and then from knee height, and observing each new result. Piaget coined this term. The babies at this age are little scientists, where they're experimenting. Very active, very purposeful trial and error exploration. So when a child is throwing the toy out of the crib, they're not trying to mess with you and being disrespectful. They're just experimenting. Try not to take it personally. Next is the 6th substage, transition to symbolic thought. And this is where toddlers begin to form symbolic representation of events. They show the beginnings of mental thought. And these representations still tend to be physical rather than purely mental, when toddlers use their own body movements to represent movements of objects in the world. For example, picture an 18-month-old girl would like to open the lid of a box. And in order to think about this, she opens and closes her hand repeatedly. Rather than work directly on the box, she first uses her hand motion as a way to think about how to open it. She is thinking about the box using symbolic representation of her hand. So it's cognitive development, and that's what we're focusing on in this unit. One of the cognitive changes of an infant is what's called object permanence. And this is the realization that objects still exist even when they're hidden from sight. You notice how infants are so amused when you say peekaboo, because when you put your hands in front of your face no longer exists. But when you suddenly move and show the baby your face, it's excitement. It's, oh my gosh, that face is still there behind those hands. It's a shock, it's a surprise, and it's very entertaining. So at 2 months of age, infants show surprise when an object disappears. However, at 6 to 8 months of age, infants will start looking for the missing object, okay, for a brief period of time, then they lose interest. Now, at 8 to 12 months of age, infants will reach or search for the completely hidden object. So let's say you put a toy underneath you put the toy underneath a blanket. And at 8 to 12 months, infant will actually look underneath the blanket to find the toy. There's a nice little video. Oh, I put video. It's supposed to be video. Next is imitation, and this is where the infant learns to observe a stimulus and then try to perform the same act. So it might be facial expressions, it might be noises. And so they start mimicking. Actually, adults probably do more imitating of the infant's behavior than infant imitating our behavior. But that's kind of the fun part of being a parent. Next is at this stage, at 2 months, imitation of actions infants see themselves make. At 8 to 12 months, they imitate other people's facial expressions. So a smile might be mimicked with the baby smiling. At 1 year, imitation of any action that wasn't in the child's repertoire begins. So they start modeling learning behaviors from other models. At 18 months old, deferred imitation, a child's imitation of some action at a later time begins. So, some critique of Piaget's views is sometimes there was some underestimation of the infant cognitive build capacity. We're going to talk about later how infant basically understands words even before they can say words. There's an inaccurate equation of infants' lack of physical ability with lack of cognitive understanding, and an underestimation of object permanence appearance from the beginning. And also, with the stage model, not all babies follow the same stages. Okay. Recent theories. Now, you're going to love this name. We're looking at development of object permanence. It's a process of elaboration, then rather of one of discovery. And this has come from B.A. Arjan and others. They use the possible, impossible events of habituation methods to study object permanence. So in other words, what they did is they did a little model, and the baby would see a ball rolling into a wall. And after a while, the baby see, oh yeah, ball rolling into a wall, nothing too exciting. But after a while, they would do what's called the impossible event, where they roll the ball behind a screen, but when they lift the screen, the ball's actually on the other side of the wall. And the baby's like, that looks different. And so the baby noticed something didn't seem right. So it's kind of interesting research with infants. So Piaget's early research says every baby comes with a repertoire of sensomotor schemes by construction, the world understanding via experiences. Recent research is newborns have considerable awareness of objects as separate entities that follow certain rules. So they noticed when the ball wasn't really, it was weird how the ball ended up on the other side of the wall. So the baby was able to kind of look at this cause and effect and say, hey, something's not right here. Spelke's alternative approach, his assumption was that babies have inborn assumptions about objects and their movement. And again, you can watch the video of this, what's called the violation of expectations method, where they create a pattern of movements for an object and then move an object in a direction that the infant does not expect. And what's interesting is when an object moves in a way that goes against what the baby expects it to go, the baby notices. So that was Spelke's what's called the violation of expectations method. Now, Bayarjan's alternative approach is, his assumption was knowledge about objects is not built in, but strategies for learning are innate. And so he used stacking smiling face blocks in a stable and unstable positions. And let's take a look at this slide here. And Rene Bayarjan's research suggests that 5-month-old infants realize that the cube in figure 2.5.2a is more stable than the one in 5.2b. So babies can start seeing this, and they're wondering, is this innate? So based on what we talked about, how would you explain infants' habit of throwing things out of the crib to a parent who views it as misbehavior that needs to be corrected? Remember what Piaget said, that infants are little scientists. They're experimenting and trying different behaviors out. They're learning cause and effect. They're not exactly misbehaving. They basically don't have a bad bone in their body. They're just trying to figure things out. Okay, with learning, how do infants learn? There's permanent changes in behavior that result from their experience. One is classical conditioning. Gunther basically showed with breastfeeding babies with less experienced mothers, a lot of times they felt smothered by the left breast. They learned to refuse the left breast. So classical conditioning, they condition with the left breast with not being able to breathe, so they use the alternate breast. Operant condition, they found out that sounds of the mother's voice or heartbeat or sweet liquids, the mother's voice is an effective reinforcer for virtually all babies. So the babies learn by positive and negative reinforcement. Not too much negative, more positive. Next is modeling. They notice that that babies, well, about 10 to 12 months old, can effectively learn or imitate behavior from other models. Schematic learning is often called schemas, is built up over many exposures to a particular experience. This helps a baby to distinguish between familiar and unfamiliar. In other words, they start learning categories. By 7 months of age, infants actively use categories to process information. We cannot process levels of categories. Babies respond differently to animals versus furniture, but not to dogs versus birds. So at 7 months of age, they're able to use, categories but not levels. So they can understand there's like a difference between, a toy and a little animal. So there's like a live animal versus inanimate toy. Different categories. So they start processing information that way. By 2 years of age, they get what's called hierarchical or superordinate categories appear. For instance, they might see a doggy and understand a doggy is an animal. And there's all other kinds of animals as well. So the superordinate is like animal. Doggy is basically the noun, but they know that doggy belongs to a category called animal. That would be superordinate category that shows up at 2 years of age. So that's a higher level category, which also includes the lower level category like dog. Okay, what do data suggest from sequential learning studies suggest? In infancy, babies respond to superordinate before basic level categories. In other words, they understand the big picture before they start learning lower, smaller categories. At 12 months of age, babies understand both basic and superordinate categories, like doggy is an animal. At 2 years of age, toddlers partially understand smaller categories nested in larger categories. And at 5 years of age, children fully understand categories. So full understanding is linked to language development and the use of words as category labels. So they have to have that cognitive ability to form language and understand those categories, Carolyn Roe Collier's research basically studied memory in babies. This 3-month-old baby in one of Roe Collier's memory experiments will quickly learn to kick her foot in order to make the mobile move. So there's a baby with a foot tied to the mobile. And so the baby learns, hey, I kicked my foot and the mobile moves. Now several days later, they tied that foot to the mobile again, and the infant remembered this connection between kicking and the mobile. So what does that prove? Newborns appear to be able to remember days after. Cognitively sophisticated. They're more cognitively sophisticated than what was previously assumed. Okay, even for as long as a week. So that's kind of cool. There, you can click this link with the regular PowerPoint and see how that actually meet a researcher in infant learning and in a personal interview. Now, Roe v. Collier also hangs an attractive mobile over a baby's crib, attaches a ribbon to the baby's leg, and records leg kicks. Her research supports the idea that young infants are more developmentally sophisticated than developmentalists and Piaget had supposed. This is kind of cool, using operant condition. It's called a pacifier-activated lullaby system. And this is used by music therapists in neonatal intensive care units. What it does is operant condition is rewarding behavior. So they reward infants with music whenever they suck on specifically designed pacifiers. So it's reinforcing the sucking behavior. This is especially important for neonatal units where they're reinforced for their sucking reflexes, which leads to more rapid weight gain, and they'll be in the neonatal ward for a lot less time. So what else have we learned about memory so far? Number one, we learned that babies as young as 3 months old can remember specific objects and their own actions for as long as a week. That's pretty good. We learned that young infants are more cognitively sophisticated than we assumed. We learned that lost memories can be reactivated, and with age, infant memories become less and less tied to specific cues or context. Okay, let's talk about language. There's three theoretical perspectives about the beginnings of language. One is behaviorist view, and that comes from B.F. Skinner. And in short, he said language development begins with babbling, then the behavior is reinforced by parents, operant conditioning. And however, parents tend to reinforce or even imitate the baby's babbling, which thus prolongs the babbling. Noam Chomsky came up with what's called a nativist view, which children acquire grammar rules before they even master the exceptions. In other words, they learn nouns and verbs, and they put them together, but they don't have the details together. Like they'll say, "I broke it." And it doesn't matter about past tense, present tense, or plural or singular. They just kind of go ahead and start, using it before they master the exceptions. Now, the interactionist view kind of combines the two. They consider both the internal cognitive development of the child with the external factors of play and imitation as they acquire language. So let's take a look. B.F. Skinner talks about parents reinforcing babbling and grammar. That correct grammar is reinforced and becomes more frequent. A lot of times he said that the parent will respond with either reinforcement or the withhold reinforcement if they didn't use appropriate words. Sometimes they'll reinforce correct grammar by repeating the appropriate version. So if a baby says "baba," the parent might say, "You want your bottle?" And so they'd be modeling appropriate behavior. Is this what you observe when parents interact with very young children? However, Skinner theory makes sense on the surface, but when you think of it, parents tend to repeat the correct grammar and incorrect grammar, which technically might reinforce the negative behavior as well, because we like imitating what they say because it's so funny. Next is Noam Chomsky, who came up with what's called the nativist view, that grammar rules are acquired before the exception mastery. In other words, they learn to speak, and they're not too concerned with following the rules because they don't know them yet. So comprehension and production are guided by what's called the language acquisition device. This language acquisition device it's an innate language processor, which contains all the basic grammatical structure of all human language. Rule-governed grammatical errors. Almost all 3-year-olds over-regularize the past tense of verbs. So a 3-year-old might say, "Yesterday we go to the store." Doesn't matter. They just haven't figured out the details of grammar. Or "I baked my cookie." Past tense, present tense is not as important. But the language processor separates sounds into vowels and consonants. All human languages have the same form, according to Chomsky. So this language acquisition device is the basic grammatical structure for all human language. It tells babies there's two types of sounds. You got consonants and vowels, enables the infants to divide, analyze, and learn sounds of the specific language. So this is part of the cognitive function that separates us from other animals, the ability to be able to do these things. Now, Slovin talks about the importance of soundness, that infants are pre-programmed to attend to the beginning and endings of the sound and to stressed sounds. So programming is not attached to verbs or nouns, but attention to the different sounds. So 4 key ideas of what's called the interactionist view is that language follows rules as part of cognition. So we have to consider the internal factors of cognitive development, but we also have to look at the external factors of interaction with the world around them. Infants are born with that biological preparedness to pay more attention to language. but also the infant brain has generalized tools used across all cognitive domains. It's not language-specific neurological model. Borman and Bloom, Louis Bloom and Melissa Borman said, when language starts to come in, it does not introduce new meanings to the child. Rather, it's used to express only those meanings the child has already formulated. Okay. For instance, a child may attempt to communicate and learn new words when these aid in the communication of thoughts and ideas. Louis Bloom, from the beginning, the child's attempt is to communicate, and he or she learns new words when he or she helps, or when they help him to communicate his or her thoughts and ideas. You've probably heard this. When adults speak to a baby, their voice changes. They have a higher pitch. Usually you have like a soft sing-song speech. Oh, aren't you so cute? Look at the little baby. Long, soft vowel sounds are actually good. They help the child to understand. They're simpler sounds to understand. Now, adults will often repeat often, introduce minor variations, and use slightly more elongated sentences. Sometimes it's called speaking in motherese or parentese. I notice I do that with my pets as well. Oh, come here, Cooper. Oh, Cooper. It's that motherese or parentese. Now, babies prefer this infant-directed speech to adult speech. It's actually easier for them to understand that long, drawn-out vowels. The baby is more easily able to imitate a correct grammatical form recast from his own sentences by an adult. Children whose parents talk to them a lot develop richer vocabularies, are able to form more complex sentence structures. So keep talking to your child. Keep that little sing-song, keep that little sing-song approach to, I gotta pause this here. Okay, here are some cool little videos, cute little babies with, one on child-directed speech and also on language development. But just keep in mind the importance of interacting with your child, your infant, to help them in their speech and language development. Next is there's a little thing in your book about the importance of reading to toddlers. Not just preschoolers love to be read to. Toddlers enjoy and benefit many of the same pre-literacy activities. Interactive reading has powerful effects on language development. That's from Whitehurst and his colleagues. There's larger vocabulary gains for young children who are engaged in what's called dialogic reading. Dialogic reading is not just reading to them, but you ask questions, you have them point to different things, you help them ask questions to see if they understand what is being explained, what is being read. So here's a question for you. What would you say to a person who claimed that reading to an infant or a toddler is a waste of time because they're limited language skills? Well, it would help their vocabulary. It would help their love for reading. It's modeling an interest in reading early on. Usually toddlers who are read to will have a higher repertoire of vocabulary. They say children going into school from a poverty background usually have 5,000 less words than a kid starting school in a not-poverty situation. So something must happen where there's more interaction, there's more maybe reading to the child. So if a toddler doesn't want to be read to, oh no, do you think his parents or teachers should try to get them interested in books? If so, how do you think they can go about it? I think I had no trouble getting my kids interested in books at that age because they always wanted me to sit down and read to them. It was always a reinforcing time. Okay, beginning of language. So basically from birth to 1 month, crying is their language. 1 to 2 months is laughing and cooing and making those funny sounds. So initially babbling contains all kinds of sounds. By 9 or 10 months, babies typically begin to babble closer and closer to the language that they hear. So babbling is also linked to gestures for demanding or asking for something. So parents encourage gestures at this age as well. Come on, go to the next window here. There we go. Now, receptive language is the ability to understand words. Now, research proves that thoughts precede language. So even before infants are even speaking words, they have an understanding of quite a few words. At 8 months of age, babies begin to store words in their memory. So before they're even speaking, they understand those words. At 9 to 10 months of age, babies typically understand 20 to 30 words. At 13 months of age, babies basically understand 100 words. Now, I don't know how they measure that, but it's kind of cool information. And then there's a nice video on language learning of babies. Next is expressive language. This is where the baby is actually able to produce words. At 12 to 13 months of age, babies begin to say their first word, da, da, mama. Words are learned slowly in context with specific situations and cues. Repetition is key that provides a mechanism for word production. Next is gestures. Gestural language is important for all babies. Deaf children who are exposed to sign language show the same early steps in language as do hearing children, where there's sign babbling, early gestures, first referential signs. Hearing children of deaf parents develop proficiency in 2 forms of language about the same time. So this provides strong support for the idea that babies are primed to learn language in some form. So why is it important comparing deaf and hearing children of deaf parents? They support the view that language development is strongly influenced by an inborn plan of some kind. In your view, what are the benefits and risks associated with being a hearing child or of deaf parents? Think about, maybe the communication skills that might be different. Let's talk about hollow phrases that are important. Young children learn and express more frequently, use words first, and then they concentrate on the others. A hollow phrase is combining a single word with a gesture, and that's to make a complete thought, pointing and saying a word. And this is between 12 to 18 months. I remember my child at that age, she would point to the light and say, "What's that?" And I'd say, "It's a light." And then she laughed and giggled and she pointed to me again and said, "What's that? It's a light." But this was part of their huge, once they're able to gesture and point to something and say, "What's that?" I guess that's 2 words, but this is where they have what's called a naming explosion. Between 16 and 24 months, at 16 months old, they have 50 words in their vocabulary. At 24 months, they have 320 words. So vocabulary grows in huge spurts. The naming explosion includes names for things or people. Action words tend to appear later. Okay, next, there's what's called telegraphic speech. This is where it's 2 to 3 words, and the threshold vocabulary reaches around 100 to 200 words. This is where they start using sentences. Sentences might be even as simple as 2 nouns, like daddy's shoe, which is a 2 noun pair meaning this is daddy's shoe. Inflections or grammatical markers are missing, like understanding plural, single, past, present, future tense. But they are able to start forming short sentences. These are milestones at different ages through the first 2 years. What I want you to understand is language sophistication makes significant process during these first 2 years. 2 to 3 months is the cooing sound, 20 weeks is vowel and consonant sounds with their cooing. That's where they come to ma, pa, mama, papa. 6 months is the babbling, uttering phonemes of all languages. 8 to 9 months is a focus on phonemes, rhythm, intonation, of receptive vocabulary, 20 to 30 words. At 1 year, they're able to actually say some single words. 12 to 18 months is their gesture and words, and 18 to 20 months is using their 2-word sentence or telegraphic speech. Okay, next is differences in the rate don't worry. Children develop at different rates. You've heard the conjecture that Einstein did not speak until 4 years of age. I don't know if it's rumor or not, but maybe he was just overly conscientious about speaking correctly grammatically. Now, don't go out and hire a speech or language pathologist right away. Most children do catch up over time. Those who don't catch up, they have some sort of poor receptive language skills. In school, they will those poor receptive skills will be diagnosed once they're up to school age. But those poor receptive skills may lead to poor cognitive development. So that could be an indicator of child having like a learning disability. Okay, next is with the beginning of language, there's differences in style. One's called expressive style. These children often learn pronouns like you, me early, and use many more personal social words like no, yes, want, please. They use multi-word strings such as I love you, and do it, and go away. Expressive language may sound advanced, but it's often they have a smaller vocabulary than referential style language. This is where early vocabulary is made up of names, things, or people. And referential style children are more cognitively oriented. They're drawn to objects, they spend more time in solitary play, interact with people more than objects. These children are often advanced in understanding adult language. I remember children who have a lot of siblings, they tend to practice what's that called, the idiosyncrasies of the other siblings' language. Where if you're an only child, you might more likely have the referential style where your communication is modeled off your parents instead of your siblings. I remember seeing this little kid who, at like 2 or 3 years old, seemed to speak perfect language because he was the only child and heard the language from his parents. And didn't have a little bit of the childlike vocabulary. Okay, next is intelligence. Now remember, the child is, how do you measure infant intelligence? Each infant develops at a different pace. There's that genetic and environmental factors that influence infant intelligence. So instead of testing school-like skills, skills an infant does not have, the items measure primarily sensory and motor skills, such as reaching for a dangling ring, an item for a typical baby at 3 months, or putting cubes in a cup on request at 9 months, or building a tower of 3 cubes at 17 months. Some more clearly cognitive items are also included, such as uncovering a toy hidden by a cloth, an item used with 8-month-old infants to measure object permanence. Across cultures, it's also known that cooing, babbling, hollow phrases, telegraphic speech are typically found in all languages. The interactions may vary between the parent and infant from culture to culture. Particular inflections are learned in highly varying and specific orders. Here's a little video of how language development may differ from culture to culture. In the Turkish language, there are no 2-word sentence stage. Essentially, all inflections are learned by the age of 2. So here's a big question: is should we teach to 1 language or 2 at an early age? Research suggests there's a cognitive advantage and disadvantages to growing up bilingual. I guess the key is equal fluency. It's not often typically attained. When there's less fluency occurring in language in which this child is schooled, problems may arise. For instance, I noticed when a child grows up and they're in a Spanish-speaking home, but English is their language that's not spoken at home. When the language in which they are less fluent in is a language they use at school, they're more at risk for learning problems, especially in vocabulary and in reading. I noticed students where English is not spoken at home, their vocabulary is much less. They'll on average, will perform lower on ACT tests and standardized tests. Doesn't mean they're less intelligent, it's just their experience with the language is not as strong as in someone who's been speaking English in home all their life. So that puts someone at a disadvantage. Where it could be to your advantage is learning the language early on, but the vocabulary development is strong, and they practice English and Spanish equally at home, so they can be fluent in both languages, not stronger in one and weaker in another. So you decide, which of these two statements do you agree with? Parents who are fluent in more than one language should raise their children to be bilingual. Or two, parents who speak more than one language should decide on which language to speak most often in the home, and they should ensure their children become fully fluent in that language. Those of you pick number one are correct. It is good to teach them to be bilingual, but make sure to have a balance so they're fully fluent in both languages, especially the one that they use in school. Okay, so finally, measuring intelligence in infants. There's what's called the Bailey scales of infant development, and they measure sensory and motor skills. They help identify children with serious developmental delays. It's not as useful predicting later intelligence. The Fagan test of infant intelligence is a standardized test of habituation. In other words, do they detect novelty, preference, a change of behavior, visual recognition. It's useful when the Bailey test cannot be used. Instead of testing school-like skills, which is skills an infant doesn't have, the items measure sensory and motor skills such as reaching for an item, putting cubes in a cup, or building a tower of 3 cubes. Also, like we said, they'll look under a cloth to find a toy to see if they've mastered object permanence. But overall, the key thing to take a look at is every child develops at different rates. To not panic if they don't seem to be fitting this developmental stage at this time, because they all eventually catch up to each other unless they have some sort of cognitive delay. This ends our unit. Have a great week.